Darth Vader's first week after the fall of the Republic was a reconstruction, and what came out of it had nothing to do with power. The first sound he ever heard as Vader was his own breathing, not a heartbeat or a voice, but a machine pumping air into lungs that no longer worked on their own. A wet, grinding rasp that would follow him for the rest of his life, and that every living thing in his presence would eventually learn to fear. He wasn't afraid of it yet because he was drowning in something far worse: pain. The surgical droids had worked on him for days inside the newly christened Emperor Palpatine's Surgical Reconstruction Center on Coruscant. The Legends novel The Rise and Fall of Darth Vader describes the procedure in harrowing detail, noting that no anesthetics were administered because the chemicals would thin the midichlorians in his blood, and Palpatine refused to risk weakening whatever remained of the Force inside a body that was already more ruined than man. So Vader felt everything, from cold metal blades slicing into flesh still raw from Mustafar, to shattering bones pulled free and replaced with plastoid, to lasers grafting prosthetic limbs onto stumps that hadn't finished burning. He screamed through all of it for days while Palpatine watched from the shadows, stepping forward only when the droids announced the construction was complete. But the helmet sealing shut did not create Darth Vader. It only exposed a problem Palpatine still had to solve. When the pressurized bodysuit locked into place and the vocabulator gave him a voice his throat could no longer produce on its own, the words that came out had nothing to do with the Sith or the Empire or galactic conquest. Vader's first conscious act was to ask about Padme, whether she was safe or alive. Palpatine answered in his most sympathetic tone. In his anger, it seemed Vader had killed her. It removed the one thing that might have made Vader turn back, the possibility that Padme was still alive. It left him with nothing to reach for except the suit and the title Palpatine had already prepared for him, and Vader's reaction proved that he was not yet the weapon Palpatine needed him to be, because he lashed out immediately, reaching through the Force for Palpatine's throat, trying to crush the man who had just destroyed him. The Revenge of the Sith novelization frames this moment in mythic terms, describing Vader as a painter gone blind or a composer gone deaf, someone who could remember where the power used to be but could only touch a memory of it now. He shattered droids and buckled walls and crushed every piece of medical equipment in the surgical theater, but he could not touch Sidious because the gap between them had become physical, mechanical, and permanent. Vader squeezed his eyes shut behind the mask, but nothing came, and he did not know whether the droids had altered his tear ducts or removed them entirely, leaving one more human response sealed behind black durasteel and one more piece of Anakin locked away where it can never surface again. What stood in that surgical chamber was not a Sith Lord, but wreckage, a man who had sold everything for a promise that was already broken before the deal closed, loyal to Palpatine only because there was literally no one else left. Palpatine understood this better than Vader did, because Palpatine had understood it before the man's eyes ever opened. The suit was a prison, and Vader suspected it almost immediately. The novel Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader catalogs the defects with clinical precision. The med droids had substituted an inferior alloy in the leg prosthetics instead of durasteel. His eardrums had melted on Mustafar beyond any hope of repair, so sound now arrived through implants that made everything register as though coming from underwater, flooded with ambient noise he could not filter. He could eat only inside a hyperbaric chamber, and his own voice without the vocabulator was a whisper. Vader asked himself a question that would haunt him for years: whether Sidious had deliberately engineered this. His internal thoughts circled the suspicion obsessively, wondering if the incompetence of the medical droids had been an accident, or if Mustafar had simply given Palpatine an excuse to cage the only man in the galaxy who might threaten him. Whether he was truly an apprentice, or just another Grievous, a mechanical body wrapped around borrowed power, performing violence on command, while the real architect of the Empire reaped every reward. He recorded that he relished having destroyed the surgical droids, but destroying them changed nothing because the suit remained, and Palpatine's grip only tightened. Palpatine did not comfort Vader or give him time to grieve, to adjust, or to sit with the magnitude of what had happened. He gave him a job. Palpatine handed Vader a task designed to prevent the most dangerous thing a broken Sith apprentice could do, which was sit still long enough to realize the entire bargain had been a lie. In one telling, it was the Marcana mission, where clone commandos had deliberately refused to comply with Order 66, and Palpatine identified the cause as contagion brought about by fighting alongside the Jedi for too many years. Vader was sent to demonstrate to those soldiers the cost of independent thought and refusing orders in the new empire. The mission was Palpatine's first real test of his apprentice, a punishment detail designed to establish Vader as the physical embodiment of Imperial authority rather than a straightforward Jedi hunt. A second Legends account from the same period goes further. In this telling, the mission cut even deeper because Palpatine ordered Vader to earn his own lightsaber, not receive one, but earn it by finding a Jedi, killing them, taking their kyber crystal, and corrupting it with the dark side until it bled red. Palpatine could easily have handed Vader a finished weapon since Sith Lords maintain stockpiles, but giving Vader a blade would have made him a passive recipient of Sith identity, someone who inherited the role rather than paid for it. Forcing him to hunt and kill and corrupt required active participation at every stage. Palpatine did not just want obedience, but wanted Vader to feel responsible for walking deeper into the trap so that the cage would feel, at least in part, like something Vader had built around himself. And when Vader sat down to construct the hilt, something happened that no amount of Sith ritual could override. Because he tried to design something new, something that belonged entirely to him, and instead ended up building a black version of the lightsaber he had carried for over a decade, every component mirrored the weapon he had lost on Mustafar. The thick ridged hand grip, the high output diadium power cell, the dual phase focusing crystal, the forward mounted adjustment knobs, the beveled emitter shroud. It was muscle memory of a dead man reaching through prosthetic fingers and recreating the only weapon design those hands had ever known. The one difference was the grip, because his new hands were too large to duplicate the loose hold Anakin had favored, so the hilt had to be made thicker and longer. And the result was, in the text's own words, inelegant and verging on ungainly. A ghost of the old weapon built by hands that could no longer be the person who designed it. Whether it was the Jedi Knight Bolsh attack on Morkana, or the combat specialist Karak and Phila on a mountain fortress, the same dynamic played out. Vader affecting the power of Anakin Skywalker and found something far less. His fighting style was stiff, clumsy, and mostly vertical, with observers noticing stances borrowed from Ataru and Suresu, while he appeared to lack a cohesive style of his own. He was powerful in bursts, but moved like a man wearing someone else's body, never fully in command of what his limbs would do. An undistinguished Jedi Knight managed to wound his forearm during their duel, and Vader was stunned because only Dooku, Ventress, and Obi-Wan had ever been skilled enough with a blade to injure him. Yet now, a mid-tier knight had drawn first blood. He asked himself whether the loss of his natural limbs had also cost him strength in the Force, and the voice that answered was the one he feared most, not Palpatine or Obi-Wan, but the specter of Anakin, the little slave boy from Tatooine, whispering that the Chosen One had died on Mustafar even if the body had refused to follow. Because of his artificial limbs, Vader can never generate Sith lightning and could never become invulnerable to it, and that ceiling was now literally fused to his skeleton because the apprentice was capped and the master was safe. Vader's clearest lesson in his first week did not come from the surgical table or the lightsaber forge. It came at a dam. He faced a Jedi he could not overpower in a fair fight, a disciplined master grounded in the Force, physically prepared, spiritually intact, everything Vader was not. In a straight contest, the Jedi wins, and he does win, outmaneuvering the stiff, vertical rage-fueled aggression, pushing Vader back and proving that fury without precision is just noise. And then Vader changes the terms of the fight entirely by attacking the dam and threatening a city full of people who have nothing to do with the duel, flooding the battlefield with the lives of thousands of civilians and turning their existence into a tactical problem his opponent cannot ignore. In Phila, because his nature as a Jedi is formed around protecting the innocent and weaves compassion into every reflex he has, divides his attention and turns from the fight to the rescue, and Vader kills him. Not because Vader became a better duelist between the first clash and the second, and not because rage unlocks some hidden reservoir of power, but because Vader discovered something Anakin Skywalker would never have allowed himself to learn. That morality creates predictable behavior. That single insight defines the next 2 decades of galactic history more than any Force power or lightsaber form ever could. Because it is the logic behind every officer Vader chokes for failure, every rebel stronghold he raids by targeting supply lines and civilian infrastructure, every negotiation where the threat is never spoken but always understood. He did not win because he became more powerful. He won because he became worse. The crystal inside the blade was synthetic, grown in a compression furnace over days of sustained dark side meditation. The process demanded that the builder channel raw emotion into the stone as it formed. Not focus, not clarity, but anger and pain fed directly into the lattice until the crystal turned red. Vader had no shortage of material. Mustafar was still inside him, the lava fields where Anakin lost his body, where Obi-Wan left him burning, where Padme had taken her last conscious breath before whatever happened aboard that ship carried her beyond his reach forever. He did not need to return to that place. He had never left it. A kyber crystal does not want to turn red. It resists and fights. And when a Force user forces the corruption by pouring rage and pain into the stone until its natural alignment shatters, the crystal does something extraordinary and opens a vision, a door, a glimpse of another path. Vader saw it. The details shift across different tellings, but the shape is always recognizable. A version of events where he stops, where he turns back, seeks out Obi-Wan, surrenders himself to judgment, and faces the unbearable weight of everything he has done. A future where Anakin Skywalker could crawl out of the wreckage and begin the slow, agonizing process of becoming something other than a monster. He saw the exit, and he chose the cage. He refused precisely because he felt too much. Redemption would have required him to sit inside the full scope of his guilt without the anesthetic of rage, without the comforting story that the dark side had chosen him, that Padme and Obi-Wan and the Jedi were the ones who had truly failed. Redemption would have meant admitting that Anakin Skywalker made a free, conscious, unforced choice, and that choice killed everyone he loved. So Vader poured his pain into the crystal until it screamed and the light inside it broke and it turned red and the vision collapsed and the door behind him closed for what he believed would be the last time. The saber did not turn red on Mustafar. Vader turned red at the dam, and the crystal simply followed suit. Somewhere in that same span of days, Vader stood on the bridge of a Star Destroyer beside Palpatine and a sector governor named Tarkin. The three of them looked out at the growing skeleton of something enormous, a spherical battle station the size of a moon, still years from completion, its superstructure crawling with construction droids and labor crews. The three figures who would define Imperial strategy for a generation gathered in the same place for the first time. Vader had built his lightsaber in the shadow of that structure, a personal weapon forged in grief and assembled in the same physical proximity as the instrument that would one day destroy Alderaan. The intimate violence and the industrial violence both under construction at the same time, and both designed to enforce the same silence across the galaxy. Stories circulated that a thin and silent figure in the black armor wielding a lightsaber, but clearly not a Jedi, had tracked down 50 Jedi traitors and killed every single one by himself. A lot of speculation followed. Many thought he was a droid, a former gladiator, a bounty hunter, a well-known public figure hiding behind a face-concealing helmet. Nobody knew who Darth Vader was, and nobody connected him to the hero with no fear, the poster boy of the Clone Wars, the chosen one of Jedi prophecy, because to the galaxy, Anakin Skywalker had died at the temple alongside the rest of the Order. Vader did nothing to correct the record, since the only thing anyone needed to know about him was that he answered to the Emperor. Vader felt more at home among the clone troopers than with anyone with a natural face, because to the clones, his armor made sense, and some of them had always wondered why the Jedi left themselves exposed. His bodysuit, his helmet, his mechanical breathing, none of it was strange to men who had been grown in tanks and sealed in plastoids since birth. And he belonged among the manufactured, among the tools, and something about that belonging was the closest thing to comfort he could still access. He described himself in his own thoughts as merely a minion, an errand boy, allegedly an apprentice, the public face of the dark side of the Force. And Palpatine reinforced this at every opportunity through a ritual exchange they would repeat for years. He would ask Vader whether he feared death, whether he sought power, whether he intended to strike his master down. Vader gave the expected answers every time, and each time they were true in the way a prisoner's confession is true, accurate enough to keep breathing, and hollow enough to preserve the fantasy that someday the cell door might open. By the end of his first week, Darth Vader had a weapon, a mission, a body count, and a title. However, he was still haunted by a dead wife and a child he believed he had killed, and he yearned for the day when memories of Anakin would fade entirely. But until that happened, which it never would, not fully, not in 19 years, he would never stop moving long enough to feel the weight of what he had become. But he was functional now, and that was Palpatine's real achievement. Not saving Vader's life or restoring his power, but giving him a purpose. Pain had become routine, grief had become motivation, and guilt had stopped being a warning. Because pausing meant confronting what Anakin Skywalker had done, and that reckoning was harder to bear than the suit, the breathing, or the memory of what his own hands had carried out. So Vader kept moving, mission to mission, kill to kill, year to year. Because in his first week, in that narrow, suffocating corridor between the operating table and the red blade, he had learned the central logic of his new existence. His pain would never heal, but it could be made useful. Guilt he could never face became fear in anyone who stood too close, and if the past refused to be undone, the galaxy could be made to suffer under it. Darth Vader did not escape Anakin Skywalker in his first week after Revenge of the Sith, but learned how to punish the galaxy for reminding him that Anakin was still there. And what came after that first week only got darker. The missions grew longer, the body count climbed higher, and the man inside the suit became something the galaxy had never seen before. If you want to follow Vader deeper into the years that made him the most feared figure in Imperial history, this is where that story continues. And if you want to pull even further back and trace the entire lineage of the Sith Order that created him, the tradition that Palpatine inherited and Vader was forged to serve, that full history is here.